Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest. Fred Armisen.
Prince Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
What's up? What is up? It's your host, Elia Einhorn. Welcome back to the Talkhouse Podcast. Joining me from the Windy City,
Josh Modell, executive editor. What's up, Elia?
Hey, man. We have a very cool show that you put together, Josh. Scott Avett of the Avett Brothers in conversation with Clem Snide's Eef Barzelay. Tell me, how did this one come together?
Well, it was sort of a natural fit because Eef just put out the first Clem Snide record in about 5 years called Forever Just Beyond, and it was produced and even some of the songs co-written by Mr. Scott Avett of the Avett Brothers.
A gorgeous sound to that record, I have to say.
It's fantastic.
Now, Scott Avett is, of course, one of the lead singers, along with his brother Seth, of the folk rock megastars, the Avett Brothers. Scott is a jack of all trades. He plays banjo, harmonica, drums, piano, and guitar. He's also a songwriter, and outside of music is actually a pretty amazing painter. Did you know this, Josh?
I had no idea.
Now, the Concord, North Carolina-based Avett Brothers' last record came just last year. That was Closer Than Together. From that album, here's Tell the Truth.
Tell the truth to yourself, and the rest will fall in place. Tell the truth to yourself, and the rest.
Classic Avett Brothers sound right there.
Super great.
Now, Josh, I understand that the Avett Brothers are Clem Snide fans.
Yeah, this whole relationship came about in kind of a really fun way. In 2016, the Avett Brothers were covering a relatively obscure Clem Snide song called The Ballad of God's Love, which somehow made its way to Eef. And he reached out to Scott Avett and said, hey, thanks for covering my song. And they ended up kind of becoming friendly and eventually making this record together.
And Clem Snide's been around for quite a while. I remember listening to them back in the 90s.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Their first recordings were made in 1991. Eef has been the only constant in Clem Snide since way back then. And they had kind of a really weird, interesting career trajectory. They were signed to Sire by music business legend Seymour Stein.
He of the Belle and Sebastian song?
The very one, and famous for signing everybody from the Ramones and Blondie and the Smiths, I think.
The Smiths, yeah.
But that fairy tale did not work out for Clem Snide in the way that it did for a lot of those other bands. They ended up getting dropped and having a great career and put out a bunch of great records in the aughts. By the 2010s, Eef was a little bit adrift. He was going through some personal and professional turmoil, sporadically releasing music, playing house shows rather than touring with a band. And he ended up declaring bankruptcy, losing his house. But all that bad stuff kind of led to Forever Just Beyond, which is, in my eyes as a huge Clem Snide fan, one of the best things he's ever done, all these years later. He calls Avett an angel in the process, a guy who helped him produce the record and also ultimately helped him get it released. Let's check out the song Roger Ebert from Clem Snide's Forever Just Beyond.
This life, it said, there is a vastness that can't be contained or described as a thought in the flesh of our brain. It's everything, everywhere, future and past.
Really beautiful stuff. Josh, you really are a big Clem Snide fan.
I have to admit that I am. I may be the biggest Clem Snide fan in the world, but I may be number 2 to NPR's Stephen Thompson, who's also an old friend of mine, and we kind of love the band together. I've known Eef since the 90s. I saw them play a bunch back then. And he's one of those songwriters that always makes me think there's no justice in the music business.
You're not wrong.
He should be massive.
Oh, of course.
But he's not. But maybe this record, which has gotten a ton of attention, partly due to the involvement of Scott Avett, maybe it's the one that'll reach him new heights. It certainly has great songs.
It really does. And it struck me that there is a much more spiritual bent on this record than we may have heard on a typical Clem Snide LP.
Yeah, it's funny. He's had a really interesting kind of spiritual journey. He was born in Israel, raised Jewish, but personally and musically was very cynical about religion and very cynical about God. And on this record, it feels like with maybe some influence from Scott Avett, who is a more spiritual guy, has come around to believing something.
What exactly is not clear from this conversation, but the talk does center in large part around spirituality and the role that it plays in both of these artists' lives and work. We even get an impromptu reading of a poem by the Indian mystic Kabir, a Thomas Merton quote, and a, as they put it, spiritual vasectomy reversal surgery.
Yes.
And Yoda. Don't forget Yoda.
If you're talking about spirituality, you got to talk about Yoda. They also talk about music as a through line during huge life changes.
Yeah, especially on Eef's part, as you mentioned. We also get to hear about being true to your craft, even when it hurts you, to let go of who you thought you could be. Josh, they're going deep here.
Very deep.
There's some psychology going on.
For sure. And we hear the sweet words that Jason Molina, the quote, visionary of darkness, shared with Scott.
They also touch on the importance of stoking the fire and fluffing the nest, as Scott puts it.
Oh, man. And we get this pretty hilarious, deep, deflating story about David Berman of Silver Jews, who became Eef's literal voice of self-doubt. Something that Berman said kind of to Eef that stuck with him forever.
On that note, let's roll the tape.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Eef kicks things off.
All right, so I'll just pepper you with some insightful questions, and then, I'll see where it goes from there. So one thing I wanted to ask you was, what's it like during quarantine? What's it like for you not touring? And you're probably not touring this whole year, right? That's what I'm gathering for most acts, if not all acts. Those of us that play small rooms still have a little flexibility, but it doesn't seem like even that's going to happen.
It doesn't, does it?
But yeah, is this the longest you've gone and will go without touring must be for years and years, right? At this point.
Yes. I'd say since 2002 or 1, this is the longest I've ever gone without touring, and the longest I've ever gone seeing my wife consecutive days.
Oh, man.
Like for real, like since we were married.
Man, that brings to mind a whole other flurry of questions that
That's
I'm
right.
not sure we want to get into on this particular podcast. But yeah, so what's it feel like? I mean, does it feel good, or are you getting cagey, as I am?
Eef, I am not cagey at all. I am extremely content and very happy being here.
That's right. You're one of the least cagey people I've ever known.
Oh,
that's great, man. I want to tell you that I love your life so much. I really do. It just makes me feel good inside whenever I picture you on the farm with your family. You know, it really is. I mean, you do have a little piece of heaven for yourself, I think, for sure.
Well, let me say, it's not all peaches and cream all the time. And
well, I'm sure. But
I totally recognize that, though, Eef. That's something that and not just me, but I think us in our group that perform together, it's available to us all to, you say it how you will, stoke the fires or fluff the nest, whatever you would want to say, but to keep a good attention on home. I mean, look, like that makes me think about the metaphor of your home and our little opportunities in life and on planet Earth to mimic the kingdom of God, to mimic heaven. Our little pitiful yet sweet attempts at doing so, and like addressing that. Wait a second, it is important for me to make my little heaven, and then that could be. I was telling Sarah the other day, I was like, I don't know that it's necessarily the specific logistics of it all, because when I was alone and lived in a really rundown apartment, I still found a really awesome, and I wasn't aware of it. I didn't recognize it like I should have and address it like I should have. I really took pride and got off on enhancing textures. Like if that old brick wall outside of my front door was what it was, I remember being lucky enough to kind of see that as just an incredible moment in space. And so I would lift that up, like I would look at it when I'd walk by it and think how incredible it was, the way that concrete, that, mossy, green, damp concrete met that brick. And then on the back deck, maybe I put a few tomato plants in the terracotta pots, and then it became this little, like what you're talking about, this little slice of place and little piece of place that felt really good, you know? And I would live up to whatever my resources were. And I have no idea why. And I know you do the same thing. The same question goes for you, Eef. Your touring life is so much different than mine. So there's a different thing to miss there. It's certainly a different thing to miss because yours is a solitary experience, has been. So that's a very different thing. So, I mean, I could see that being missed quicker or easier.
Oh, I mean, you know, and the Lord he made a rambling man for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love being at home, but yeah, I ache to be on the road. Yeah, it's been funny, the kind of inverse of my experience to yours. After slogging along in, you know, small clubs with a semi-functional band, having to be there at 5 and sitting around some bar after sound check, and then going on at 11, and then, you know, smoking a bunch of cigarettes and stuff. At this point, as a middle-aged man, doing it alone, just getting in my rental car and just driving to people's homes, just showing up at 7:30, taking my guitar out, you know, having some potluck, chatting with some people, playing without even an amp,
Yeah.
and then getting back in my car and driving away by myself. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to have that. And honestly, I've toured on a bus. I did some Ben Folds tours, you know, years ago, and I was kind of missing. I was missing the van. I was missing the rental car.
Of course,
I don't like sleeping on a bus, man. Oh, very.
Yeah,
it's not cool. I know. At first, it's exciting, but yeah, I think after a while. But, you know, you play the rooms that you play. You know what I'm saying? Like,
that's right.
I mean, you go where they want you to, and you do what you got to do. We can never own our success, but we tend to own our failures.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When we become successful, we realize that we're just vessels. We're just lucky as shit, you know?
Yep.
Like anytime good things have happened to me, I've been so just awestruck by how lucky, like when some big whatever thing falls in my lap, I'm like, wow. I mean, but like ultimately your success is beyond any sort of cause and effect, whether you want to assign God to it or not.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
God is a useful word, so I like to use it, but obviously, what does that even mean? So you could say the universe. That's like a more secular spin. But then your failures are the things you hold on to forever. You know what I'm saying? And that's, I think, what most people tend to do. I mean, most of the people I've known have, you know, tried to make it as artists / musicians, whatever. And, you know, most people don't make it. You know what I'm saying? There is,
that's right.
Like, nowhere is the 1% to the 99%, you know, fact of life more apparent than in the music or in the arts. And all the government intervention in the world will never change that. You know what I'm saying? That it just works out that way, that the people at the top get it all and everyone else, you know, that's just how it is, just by the numbers. And so I've thought about people that I've known for a long time and myself and what is the sort of secret to success. It's going to be like a real self-help thing. And it really is to somehow transcend yourself. You know, if you realize you don't own your success, then you can also not own your failures and just do God's will. What does God will for you to do? Do it and shut the fuck up. You know what I'm saying? And when I've done that, I've been more successful. So it works.
Doubt.
So I'm proof that it works. You know, it's not like you have to walk towards God. It's just that you have to walk away from yourself, from your ego, from your idea of yourself. You know, whatever you want to call it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. I do. It's a very Jesus way of living. Like that feels like what Jesus was saying to us. It really does. And like you said, if for whatever words people want to use to describe it, like we have to allow people. We don't allow. I'm saying we have to allow ourselves to honor people for who they are and how they speak, not try to change them into our. Hear them for who they are and honor that and lift that up with whatever else. It's important.
The one thought I had too is it's such a tiresome debate within the culture between, let's say, believers and non-believers, right? But to me, it always struck me as just, this was the metaphor I came up with, brilliant. It always struck me as like someone prefers Beethoven and someone prefers 9 Inch Nails. Right?
Yeah.
And they can argue back and forth about what is like real music, you know? And the guy who loves Beethoven hears 9 Inch Nails and thinks, God, or whatever, Skinny Puppy or Daft Punk or some ungodly noise like that. And hears that and goes, oh, that's not music. And they argue forever, eternally. But God is just music. Neither one of them ever says, oh, but there's no such thing as music. So it's like, that's how I always felt about it. It's like, yeah, I used to be an atheist. I don't know what the hell I am, but I think it's not a worthwhile argument in a way. Because even if you say, oh, I don't believe in God, you never escape God's judgment. You know what I'm saying? like this pandemic is God's judgment, you know? And I clicked on this thing I sent you, which I found, I don't even know where I found it. Kabir, like a Sufi poet, I think. I'm not even sure. It says, friend, hope for the guest while you are alive. Jump into experience while you are alive. Think and think while you are alive. What you call salvation belongs to the time before death. All right, this one gets good. If you don't break your ropes while you're alive, do you think ghosts will do it after? The idea that the soul will rejoin with the ecstatic just because the body is rotten, that is all fantasy. What is found now is found then. If you find nothing now, you will simply end up with an apartment in the city of death. If you make love with the divine now, in the next life, you will have the face of satisfied desire. So plunge into the truth. Find out who the teacher is. Believe in the great sound. When I read that, I thought of you completely.
It's so good. No, it's so good.
I love the urgency of it. If anything, maybe that's what organized religion, it falls short when all its promises are in the next life.
That's right.
You know, like people don't need, they need something that works now, you know, today.
I think that's right.
Hey, it's Elia again. We here at Talkhouse are really psyched to work with a company like Allbirds. I wear Allbirds running shoes, but my faith in the company was doubled when they asked us to pull the ad that we'd recorded for this week and sent us this statement in its place. Normally, this sponsored read would focus on what Allbirds does as a business and talk about one of our new products. But there's something much more important happening in our country and around the world right now. Acknowledging injustice is not the kind thing to do, it's the right thing to do. As a business, Allbirds has always stood for the planet, and standing for the planet also means standing for its people. We believe that everyone should be able to enjoy all the Earth has to offer without fearing for their lives because of the color of their skin. And while we admit that we're not entirely sure what the right thing to do is at a time like this, we know that just stating our support isn't enough. We need to take action. As a first step, Allbirds has contributed to organizations like the National Movement for Black Lives and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to support their efforts. We encourage you to demand change and make your voices heard. Black Lives Matter.
When I think about the songs that you made for this record, for Forever Just Beyond, you know, there's so much intentionally labeled spiritual music out there, easily found in Christian. I'm not conveniently exposed to other religions as much, but it's not hard to find Christian music. But when I think about music that is both Christian and Buddhist, or both Christian and Jewish, and both Christian and Muslim, or both Muslim and Jewish, but a mystic song, you know, and intentionally, not too intentional, because it really can't be, but in the realm of contemplative prose, maybe, or contemplative existence, contemplative melody. I know other singers and musicians and artists that do this. And in fact, all artists, they all do this in a way.
Yeah.
But, you know, the statement that you were making with all these songs, I think that's in every single one of them, even though they change subject and subject matter, is of a mystic's musing. And, I think that to me, I want to say, you know, it's intentional. This is songs for the mystic, and I don't think that's all we've heard from Eef, and I don't think it's all you've heard from us. What the danger for me has been, how do you, like, it becomes agenda, like, oh, I can just see, you know, I can see it do it again and do it more, and it can't live like that. It never lives like that.
What's the marketing angle here?
Right. How are we going to promote this? It can't ever live like that, and that's okay because it just can't. But it wasn't born out of that with you and I. And you've become a master in your craft, and it shows in the crafting of these melodies in space.
Well, thanks, man. That's coming from you, that carries a nice bit of weight.
It's true, man. I mean, it's true.
I'm humbled before your praise. Like I said before, I've only gotten better at it, I guess, by letting go of it. The word mystic is right there, and the word mystery, which is just what we don't know, which I have a lot of respect for. Like, I don't know. There's so much I don't know. I'm humbled before everything that I don't know. And, we live in the culture is so full of knowers. Everybody knows something. Everyone's telling you something that they know. Everyone's an expert. Everyone's, the information age is not, I should have lived. I wish I'd lived 1,000 years ago, on a clipper ship. I'm not meant for this time. Yeah, I have a deep longing to pull away from the world. And I just read 7 Story Mountain when I was driving back from your house. Actually, I audibled it.
Oh yes, yes.
I long to live on a monastery. At this point, especially.
I know, right?
I have no worldly desire. I'm so done with this world. But I still have a family, and I got to make a living. And I'm not ready to dissolve back into the ether, but. Just from my own personal experience, maybe because, I had a strange early childhood being from Israel and then, growing up on a kibbutz, but then moving to New Jersey. And so my whole life, like, I've never felt at home in this world. Like, there's never been a place that's, what I'm saying? Even in New Jersey, I was like, not quite, I'd go to Israel in the summers, but then I wasn't quite Israeli. Like, I was never, I was always in this weird kind of in-between kind of place. So, I mean, maybe that's why I ended up being who I am. I think about that a lot, obviously, like how we end up who we are. And it's also made me think, like, who am I really? Like one time, I think I was about 19, and I was being nostalgic, and I remembered my dad mentioning that he used to record me as a small child. He had all this like recording equipment. So I said, remember you mentioned that? So he pulls out the old the dusty 1/4-inch tape, reel to reel, and like threads it up. And then the voice that kind of came out of the speakers was like this little Israeli boy. And I started crying so intense. I've never cried. I don't think I've ever cried that intensely in my life. I mean, whatever. It was one of the most like emotional, and it just came out of nowhere. I was just like, oh. And I looked at my parents, and they both had like the saddest looks. Even before I started crying, I mean, I ran to the bathroom and like cried in private shame. I felt like that little boy was dead. Like I'm listening to it, and that I killed him. Like that was the feeling. I had this overwhelming feeling of guilt, weirdly enough. Anyway, so my sense of myself, and and I was miserable in my 20s. I mean, I had a stomach ache for 9 years. I was like, I didn't know. I was just so lost,
Yeah.
And all I had was this music. So I do it. I realized at one point that I just like, I have to do this, like I have to. Like, even if I'm playing in a living room for 30 people or wherever it is, however much money comes in that year, like I have to do it. And that's been tough, obviously for the family and for people around me. And anyway, I don't know, I'm going off on myself too much.
Yeah, but that's how you love them. You love them that way by being you. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, this gets psychological, but it's very true.
Exactly. Like I can't. I've been doing this for a long ass time, and there were moments over the last 20 years when I remember when I first met you, I was telling you how I was fantasizing of becoming an EMT. I still fantasize about that. Like that's real, man. Talk about keeping it real. But I could never do that. I could never do that, and it pays like shit too, which is so wrong. But anyway, I just have to do this until I die. Like that's my fate, And in that way, both me and God are satisfied, I feel like. You know what I'm saying? Yes, this is what you wanted me to do. Like, yes, I didn't want to do anything else. I didn't do good on my SATs. I probably shouldn't have skipped school so much in high school. All right, yes, but here we are. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Man, I have 3 things to say about all that. And each one is an essay.
Sorry. I've had way too much coffee this morning.
I need more.
So caffeinated right now.
Oh, man. One, you were talking about knowing, like, I agree with you. I think that we worship knowing. Like, our culture worships knowing. Like, that is where, like, when we look at stats, when we look at numbers, when we look at what's going on, like, that's more important than what can we do within to deal with what's going on. We think that if we know more, that we'll be good. And eventually we'll know so much that we'll have it all covered. That's impossible. And I think intelligence is a must. I don't think it's bad to want to know everything, to want to know as much as possible. It's just that we try to know the wrong things. I'm convinced that as I watch my children grow and I think about the knowledge that's being pumped into their brains, I start thinking the most important knowledge they need to know are things like, how do I feel when someone points out an inferior aspect to my being? How do I process being slower or less in some aspect of life? How am I me? How do I know myself? That's the most important work that we can do. And leading into that, the second thing that I would say is, like, your expression. Like I said, one thing I admire about what, like, you're doing it. I read about John Hartford doing it back in the day. He didn't write as much music in his second half of life. What he did was say, I'm going to swing this hammer, and it's going to be me playing old time songs on the fiddle and the banjo. And I'm just going to dig into that to no end. And in that commitment, he ended up making this, like, insanely creative version of all that music, like, insanely. So with you, Eef's just another singer-songwriter, right? But through that commitment comes these insanely creative and groundbreaking expressions. And through the commitment is where, and my therapist taught me this first. She's the one that said, you don't find freedom in endless options. You find freedom in commitment.
Yes, absolutely.
And that blew my mind. And that aspect, something like a pandemic where you're confined to home, you start going, wait a second, if I commit to a few things while I'm in this, all of a sudden you start finding these groundbreaking, like, little pockets of universe exploding and expanding all around you in this little moment because you've committed. And so for you in your life, and for me, I used to talk about, I'm going to be a farmer maybe. And I have been very lucky, basically because of some of the things my father did, to have land around me that we should be good stewards of. But me being a full-time farmer, that is not commitment to my craft, which is music and art, which is creating in that realm. So I had to say, okay, whether I'm good at it or not, which I doubt I am good at farming, but I cannot, that's not a commitment. It looks wholesome on paper, but it actually would be very detrimental to me. And the third thing was what you just said about crying, about that recording. It reminded me of something that I've done since I can remember. And it's something I've had to put in check in second half of life. And it would happen a lot when I would drink. It was at its height in my early 20s while I was in art school. I would go to this Mexican restaurant on Monday nights, and they had pitchers. They had Dos Equis pitchers, and we would just belly up and eat chips and drink beer for 3 hours, or 4 hours or whatever, which is just ludicrous in its own right. It's really crazy behavior to make that a habit. It's just crazy, and but it was a total habit. But the most sincere thing that would happen, or the most memorable thing, it was all sincere. I would go to the bathroom many times through a night that I'd be drinking that kind of beer, and I would find myself standing in front of the mirror, looking, and maybe a lot of people do this. I think they do, but I want to just say it. I would look, and then I would intentionally try to separate my soul from who I was looking at. Like I would look until at times I would be grossed out by who I saw, not because I thought, ooh, ugly, sick, yuck, but maybe grossed out in the way that it looked so unfamiliar, and that, how could this be? I've written about this in songs, but I would stare and stare until I would feel removed from who I was looking at. Like, who is that? Who is that? That's not me. That's not me. And nobody here is me. Like, that's not me. And I didn't make a lot of it except just imagination and something that I did. But when I look back now, like those little moments like you're talking about, like hearing and being and weeping, knowing there's a, you know, like Eckhart Tolle says, there is a me and then there is a myself, you know. And then speaking of Thomas Merton, you know, true self, false self, you know, like there's all that's wrapped up in it. They articulate it so well, and they're great guides in it to really formulate it. But man, all three of those things, and I'm sure that got you thinking. I bet you have similar experiences.
Yeah, man. I've had similar experiences, but on different substances. You know, not on beer,
not Dos Equis.
Beer
didn't do it to me. Don't get me wrong.
I'd have been throwing up.
I am very sensitive. I know, sensitive.
But it is like a. What's the word? You know, like a screen. Some people's screen is just really gunky, and some people's it's just not so gunky, or some event occurs and kind of blows the, you know, and you see clearly, you know. And I think, yeah, I've had intimations. One of the weirdest moments I ever had, like, I swear to God, this was when I was 9 years old, and it was the Dukes of Hazzard premiered. I remember because I was so excited, and I loved the Dukes of Hazzard, 1979, third grade. And then after, I don't know what this had to do with the Dukes of Hazzard, but it happened the same night. I got into bed and I closed my eyes, and I only saw white. I can't explain it beyond that, but it was this really strange feeling, and it was a kind of out-of-body feeling. It was more just a feeling. It wasn't like I could see myself, whatever. But it was the first time I just had this sense of, just a sense of something, I don't know, beyond myself, I guess.
Yeah.
And then ever since then, I've just been kind of weird. I'm kind of a weird guy, I guess. Whatever. But you know what I'm saying?
I do. I used to love it when people called me weird. I don't think we are that weird, actually. But first off, a disclaimer. Don't get me wrong. Beer wasn't the exact variable. Just like you said, it didn't take beer. Just I would find it being enhanced when I guess probably when you would be drinking, your guard was down a little more, right? And time starts to be less of a thing. That might be a good thing, even though the habit of drinking beer in that quantity is really detrimental for me. But that would happen as a kid without any help at all. And I think that's, something that would happen a lot as a kid was I would just take time to just be. And I might have a point, like I might be playing a certain, setting up action figures or something. I would be doing something, but eventually it would end in me just sort of laying. We had a garden that would be plowed up, and I might just lay there and just look to the sky, which led right into, teenage years. One of my main things was to get to a field and just stargaze, all night if I could. Happened all the time. I mean, stargazing was that was one of my priorities, one of my top hobbies, just to be with all that bigness and that unknown.
You do. You are like a seer. Like you look into things, I think, more carefully than maybe most people, and it makes perfect sense that you would be the painter that you are. That you paint people. You're always like trying to see. Right, that's that line. I wrote that line for you. Well, maybe not for you, but it wasn't. It's part of mine. Heaven spread all around us. Maybe too close to see. That reminds me of you.
No, so nice. So nice.
All right, wait, I had one more good question. All right, the thing that I always wanted to ask you, even before we met, and I don't want to set it up too much, but all right, so obviously we're talking about the culture and how, there is, I've heard it described as like the meaning crisis. Like we could define it in spiritual terms or political or, cultural, but it's all really the same shit, People long for meaning, maybe now more so than ever, just because they got so much more time on their hands. One of the things I love about you guys and what you do, I feel like you do perform kind of religious, you feel a religious yearning for people that maybe aren't necessarily getting it from like Sunday church service, whatever. Are you aware of that? Like, do you ever think of it in those ways? And if so, like, how do you sort of treat that responsibility? that's a big question for you there.
Yeah. So that means that in playful terms, you are like a traveling spiritual nomad, and we would be like the mega church evangelists traveling around.
Yeah.
There's some funny truth to that, but I don't take all that to.
I mean, right? You're putting on a rock and roll show. Ultimately, I don't mean to,
No, I got to do it.
It's framing.
Yeah, it doesn't, and it doesn't sound. It's not. It's appreciated, and it's been alluded to and definitely implied before. The thing is that we just are what we are, and you understand this. You've seen how things unfold for you and I. That's exactly how the band unfolded. It's just been a longer period, and so it's grown in the best way that we could let it grow appropriately to its size and relationship with all things. Man, I wanted to mention this. I wasn't sure if there would be an opportunity to, but there sort of does fall into place here. I saw that Secretly Canadian was going to put out a Jason Molina record that hadn't been released.
Yeah.
What a special writer and a special, just songster and visionary of life and sad person, a visionary of darkness. But he said, we were playing a tour with Magnolia Electric Company and they were opening for us at the Fillmore in San Francisco. I think it might have been 2 nights. And he said something to me. He was trying to express, he was saying, you did it. Like I don't remember his exact words, but he was kind of saying, I've been miffed at how to be me and do what I do and be able to let it live in a way that was bigger than just what it is. Like, how could I go out and present it to more people without it being compromised? And he was saying, oh man, I really valued the way he put it to me. And it was very unguarded and very sweet. And, how graceful and awesome and plain spoken as well his songs are. This was more awkward and even more honest in a beautiful, awkward way. But for us, it's been about letting it grow naturally and always trusting that if we just keep it local in our brains and in our existence in how we write and express, then it will always be universal and global in how it's received. So keeping those feelings that we have very close and small, keeping them there because we just trust that everybody has those intimate relationships with themselves and with what it is, the universe or God. And so I think that is spiritual. And so, of course, we have a spiritual connection to anyone that we come in contact with and perform for. To me, it is. Art and performance are our spiritual duty. And they're wrapped up. God is wrapped up in every last bit of it. And it's so mysterious and so impossible for me to understand and really articulate. It's ridiculous to try. And I'm an addict to trying to do it. I love trying. And, but it's funny. I can metaphorically look at it like you're like that nomad or that monk, but spiritual nomad is better because of your rambling needs. You're going into homes and doing it. And that's like, instead of blunt force, it's like a very scapular sort of precise to freeze up the wordage a little bit.
Vasectomy reversal surgery.
Exactly.
That's oh man. That's when we first started touring through the South. That's all I remember was all the vasectomy reversal surgery billboards.
Wow. Wow.
Sorry, that's a really weird tangent. But I love that you're talking about that exchange with Molina. That's pretty amazing.
It was special.
All right, so 2 things I want to throw in there, and then I think I don't have that much more time. But one thing I realized getting older is that you don't, like you keep saying, playful. Like your relationship to the muse, let's say, is just inherently maybe playful and joyful, whereas I think a lot of people connect to the muse through their suffering and think that that's the only way into it, or that's what makes it real, or that's what And I was definitely one of those people. Like I came to it more as a way to alleviate my existential suffering, I guess. I have a similar experience with someone very much like Molina that was Dave Berman, right? You know Dave Berman at all? Do you know the Silver Jews?
Oh, yeah.
So I moved, all right, so I'll tell this story quickly. So I moved to Nashville right about 15 years ago, and I started working with Mark Nevers, God bless him. And Mark Nevers does Lamb Chop and Silver Jews. And without even knowing it, I was kind of copying Dave Berman. Like Dave Berman had already moved to Nashville, and he was working with Nevers, and he was like the sort of, you know, cynical, lyrical, Jewy dude. And so I came to town like, and I think he was kind of a little pissed about it. So he came, one of the early sessions I had with Nevers, and I wasn't working on anything good at all at the time, just like I wasn't in a particularly good place, but I had some songs and I was trying to put them together. So he just like pops in, hey, you mind if I hang out? You know, sure. I'd only met him like once or twice before. And I moved to Nashville. It's all anybody could talk about, at least in the little scene that I stumbled into. It's Berman this, but everyone had their Berman stories. And larger than life. So he is, and we're hanging out, and we're listening to the playback on this song called I Believe Your Lies. And it was like, you know, tell me something. I can't remember the words, but it was like, you know, I believe your lies was the gist of it. And we're just sitting there. He's like 2 feet away from me, and he kind of says it, not even to me, but just kind of to himself. He goes, he's like, some fucking college kid's going to think that's really deep. You know, like the most cutting, like dismissive way. And I almost pretended like I didn't hear him. I was like, yeah, you know, like, or maybe I laughed it off. And man, I kid you not, for the next 10 to 15 years, he was the voice of my self-doubt, right? Every time I would doubt myself, which was often when shit wasn't going well for me, he came up in my mind, you know, Berman, like he was the real deal. You know, he had books of poetry published. He was like legit. And then the motherfucker hangs himself like 6 months ago. He hangs himself. So like the embodiment of my self-doubt hung himself. So I'm free.
That's right.
Am I? You know, like I've been thinking about that a lot. Like why did he hang himself? You know, and it kind of goes in with what you were talking about with Molina. Like, let go, man. Like, yeah, kill yourself, but don't kill your body.
Yeah.
Kill yourself in your mind.
Yeah, that's it.
You're not your body. You don't get to kill your body. God owns your body, not you. Just try and take care of it. Yeah, go for a fucking walk. Do some push-ups, you know. Yeah. Drink some homemade ginger beer. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So that's partly what I realized as well.
I think
anyway,
there's something to it.
I think we're almost out of time. But yeah, let me hear what you got to say, man.
I don't know. I think that you just saying there's definitely a self. Like I'm like with you on that. I always want to be loving to these bodies that are gone. I want to be. I don't want to be angry at them. But I think you just nail it when you say you have to kill something in yourself. Like
something does have to die.
Yes, something has to die. I was thinking beyond that, going, well, I don't know if you can actually even kill it, depending on what we're talking about. But I know that that little false self in me, the little me or the false self, I wonder often, am I capable of killing it? I doubt it. Will it ever die completely? I hope, right?
Yeah.
But we're saying the same thing. And Richard Rohr is a great example of, you know, he'll say it in a way that he's like, every great teacher that really knows what they're saying has died before they die. They've had a death before. And I'll take that in small increments. I think it happens daily. I really do. I think it happens daily in each of us and in little increments throughout life. And some people's death is massive and very young, and they live through it or they don't. Their body lives through it or they don't. And I think that it happens for most of us in little ways for a long time. And what I said to you a couple weeks ago when we were together doing the Tiny Desk concert is that the admiration that I have for you and for others like you is that you are a student of life that is awake to that learning and awake to that journey. And whether you're good at it or not is never going to be the thing. There's a line that I wrote that I was thinking, I got to send this to Eef, and I will after we talk about this, but it said, in this exact realm, man, the line says, Yoda was full of shit. There is no do, there is only try. That's it, There is only try. So
there's only try.
And to speak against Yoda, if you go against Yoda, you're in trouble.
That little green bastard.
Eef Barzelay, Scott Avett, thank you so much for joining us here on the show. Listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, there's a few conversations between singer-songwriters that also focus on spirituality, and we want to share those with you. There's Torres with Brandy Carlisle, as well as Pedro the Lion's Dave Bazan with Tom Berlin.
You can find Talkhouse on all your favorite social channels at Talkhouse.
While we usually credit professional engineers, Josh, every voice that the listeners have heard today was recorded by the person speaking. That goes for Scott, Eef, yourself, and me, all working from our respective #StayHome studios. Our producer is Mark Yoshizumi.
The Talkhouse theme was composed and performed by The Range.
Our researcher for today's show was Samantha Small. Till next week, I'm Elia Einhorn.
And I'm Josh Modell. Thanks for listening, and may God hold you in the palm of his hand.
Peace.